eye chart. It's Stefan Mychajliw, about as easy as to pronounce as Vivek Ramaswamy. So I've been called.
I see. Was it kind of like part of the job description was exactly how many syllables does your last name have? You're hired.
Yeah. Vivek didn't find a deputy communications director named Joe Smith. He had to find someone with a similar challenging last name.
I love that. So, tell us a little bit about Vivek. What do you currently do for Vivek?
Yeah, so I'm the deputy communications director. I work on social media. One of my specialties is rapid response. Don't hold it against me. I was a former television news anchor. It wasn't fake news back then. Former elected official. And then I didn't run again. I was the county controller, kind of like a watchdog position in Buffalo, New York. And then I joined Vivek's campaign. One of my specialties is social media. And, you mentioned Ron DeSantis, and that Vivek is now in second place, polling right there with Ron DeSantis. And you should have seen his team and surrogates melting down on social media today.
Oh, we've seen.
We know.
We've been watching and keeping close eye on the situation for several months. Actually, one of the things that we'll bring up is that we've noticed some commentary from the DeSantis team where they've made claims where, Vivek's popularity is it's only on Twitter. It's not, it doesn't actually exist, which is an interesting point for them to bring up because it's something that we've felt is very representative of the DeSantis campaign and kind of this astroturf strategy that they've taken to Twitter to take over the MAGA vote, if you will, where it seems like Vivek has definitely positioned himself in very much in an embracement and support of MAGA core values, if you will.
Yeah, 100%. Vivek always says he's not running against Donald Trump. And I believe Ron DeSantis is doing exactly that. Vivek just says, I'm running for president. It's as simple as that. And, newspapers had written stories today that Vivek is actually the most traveled candidate out of anyone. This week, he's in 5 states in 4 days. He's not taking anything for granted. And Vivek says all the time that he deeply respects Donald Trump and the work he did in 2016. He just wants to lead a national revival and make that America First agenda to just go to the next level. I think it's a big difference between Vivek's campaign and Ron DeSantis. It appears as though the DeSantis team is just attacking Donald Trump, attacking MAGA, and Vivek Ramaswamy wants no part of that. He's running for president on his own, and he says all the time, I'm not running against anyone. He's just simply running for president of the United States.
Right. So I have a few questions. I've been following Vivek, and that's how I reached out to the team, and I find him to be a very interesting candidate, also very charming, and I think he has more of the people touch or can connect more with people versus Governor DeSantis,
Very
who
personable.
we unfortunately we voted for him, we supported him, but he is a very he doesn't have that charm. He's not able to connect with voters. However, I've noticed, especially this week, that there's been a few controversies coming out of big influencers in the MAGA Twitter sphere, if you want to call it. The first one being DC Drano, who brought up some old tweets from Vivek that supported masks, I think supported vaccines, supported I forgot the other thing that he posted, but it was mostly that stuff during COVID. I mean, I don't necessarily hold that over people's heads because I do know that during COVID, a lot of people were scared. A lot of people panicked at first. Some people thought that it was actually good to mask and get the vaccine. So I'm not going to necessarily crucify Vivek or anybody for that. But what's your take on that when it comes, when people are digging up these old tweets from Vivek, somebody as big as DC Drano, who has a lot of influence and power within MAGA? What do you have to say about those tweets and that small controversy?
Yeah, happy to talk about that. When it comes to masks, conservatives should be happy that one of the Supreme Court nominees that Vivek said he would nominate to the highest court in the land actually knocked down a lot of the mask mandates. And when Vivek was in the state of Ohio at the very height of the COVID crisis, he was part of the commission that was leading part of the state's response in Ohio, and he actually left because he had a lot of the common sense solutions that they just ignored. He's absolutely, positively against a vaccine mandate. And some of those other issues that you mentioned, like World Economic Forum, Vivek was never a member, Never. They named him
Yeah,
without.
that was the other thing I was going to ask.
Yeah, it's an easy one to talk about because Vivek was never a member. They named him without permission. WEF is known, a World Economic Forum, they're known for their very shady scheme of naming prominent people without permission just to fool and manipulate the masses. Vivek was never a member, never attended, and he sued them. And only until he did, WEF basically stuck their tail between their legs and admitted that he was never a member.
Right.
Stefan, another question that has come up, and I'm not sure if it's a hard question to answer, but I'm sure that's one that's been asked of you, and I want to give you the opportunity to address it. Is that recently it surfaced that Vivek received a fellowship from Soros Brothers organization.
Yeah, totally separate from the World Economic Forum. That's a very fair and a good question. So when Vivek was 25 years old, over a decade ago, he and hundreds of other students accepted a scholarship that was partially paid for by a relative of George Soros, who's been dead for 10 years. No connection to George Soros whatsoever. It was a scholarship that hundreds of other students received, and the guy is dead. So it's interesting how Vivek is getting all these attacks from the DeSantis camp and all these Twitter trolls because of the fact that he's rising in the polls and is now in second place. But these are easy questions. And Vivek says all the time, if he can't sit for tough questions, he should not be the leader of the free and Western world.
Yeah, something that I really liked about him, and that Ron DeSantis and his surrogates just simply can't admit into, was that Vivek was actually the only candidate who spoke against HB 269, Florida bill, HB 269, which is the anti-Semitism bill, which is really a hate speech bill. And they keep telling us it's not a hate speech bill. It's actually extending property rights, and it's going to protect police. And if you don't like it, you're anti-Semitic and you hate Jewish people. And it's just like, no, it's not. You guys found a legal loophole to punish speech that you don't like. You passed it, you went over to Israel, and you signed the law. And I saw that Vivek got a lot of nasty comments and heat on Twitter, because that's really where all the controversies and all the debate is taking place. Did he mention anything about that? Like, what's his stand on stuff like that? Or
can you share a little bit about what his hot take is on HB 269, and kind of more so, I guess I'm more interested in hearing what's his take on DeSantis signing HB 269, a bill that, as Linda mentioned, does encroach on our First Amendment right to free speech, and that he actually signed it out of the country in Israel.
Right.
Well, let me turn the clock back just a little bit, if I may, to when Donald Trump was first indicted by Alvin Bragg. And literally within minutes after that indictment came out in New York State, Vivek Ramaswamy right away said, the first thing I'm going to do is pardon Donald Trump if I'm elected president of the United States. Ron DeSantis was quiet for days.
Yes, he was.
That's the big difference between Vivek and a Ron DeSantis type, is that Vivek has the courage of his convictions, doesn't need to talk to a pollster or a focus group. Ron DeSantis was silent. Again, going back to the indictments when Vivek Ramaswamy, he flew down to Florida. He's the only candidate to do so and say, you know what? I'm standing on the steps of this courthouse to say I'm going to pardon Donald Trump. Now, that very specific bill is one that I have not spoken to Vivek Ramaswamy about. But the one thing that he has talked about was the fact that Ron DeSantis, basically, when it comes to the case of Disney, cutting these kind of sweetheart deals when it comes to putting in legislation at the very last minute that exempted Disney when it comes to free speech and issues like that. And Vivek called him out on Meet the Press and things of that nature. And I think that's a big difference between Vivek Ramaswamy and Ron DeSantis. Again, look no further than Donald Trump. Vivek says all the time, I'm running for president, and it would be a lot easier for him to win if Donald Trump were out of the picture. But he does not want to win that way. And he's defending the fact that it's a hyper-political and partisan attack on Donald Trump. It's a weaponization of the Justice Department. He does not want to win that way, the presidency of the United States. He defended Donald Trump. Ron DeSantis did not.
Not only, I want to actually correct you, Stefan, not only did he not defend him, he actually held a press conference and in very self-serving commentary towards the injustice that Donald Trump is currently facing, he dropped a little funny where he made light of the situation by saying that he didn't have experience with paying off hookers. That really wasn't his thing. But then he realized that it was a targeted attack. So not only did Ron DeSantis not stand up for Donald Trump, he actually went out of his way to create part of the problem that we're seeing of this narrative being built. And it's definitely something that I think we can both agree is something that most MAGA supporters look at Vivek and they can respect him for it. And I think that that's a lot of the shift that we might be seeing in the polls right now, is that and you know, you handling this campaign on Twitter, I'm sure that you can attest to this, that the DeSantis campaign has really their strategy is exceptionally toxic. It's some of the most toxic political commentary that we've seen in the last 6 years that we've been doing political online, commentary. You know, we had huge platforms during one of the most divisive elections that this country has ever seen in 2020. And we never heard the vile and disgusting things that we've heard from DeSantis camp. I mean, we've been told to go back to our countries, to clean toilets, that, you know, a commentary on our looks. As what we've seen from Vivek is that there is a very clear respect towards Donald Trump, his accomplishments, and that MAGA
also
base.
The base, right? So he was very popular. Did you attend the Turning Point USA event in Palm Beach this past weekend?
I did last year. I traveled with the campaign at the very beginning in New Hampshire, but I was not at Turning Point USA. But, you know, Vivek just hit it out of the park. Not only with
he was a star.
Florida. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the reason is, again, because Vivek always says he's not running against Donald Trump in any way, shape, or form. Not at all. He actually says, I'm running for America and I want to build on Donald Trump's America First agenda. You know, when you talk about sincerity of the candidates too, that's something you just can't fake. I was a former elected official, and either have a connection with people or you don't. You can't teach it to someone. You can't teach that sincerity. And I can speak for Vivek that when he talks about his America First agenda, destroying the deep state, you know, returning America to that shining city on a hill, he connects with people. And that's why he's now in second place with Ron DeSantis, and he's dropping like a rock.
Let me, there's a new article that just came out a few hours ago from ABC, and it says Ron DeSantis is planning a campaign reboot as he struggles to close the gap with Trump. The DeSantis campaign officials tell NBC News that there's a shift to less a Florida focus, more lean events, and an insurgent approach. What do you have to say about that?
I mean, when it comes to that, it's reminiscent of Jeb Bush in 2016. That's exactly how that campaign feels. You know, it's totally different than how Vivek Ramaswamy is running for president. He's earning every single vote. I mean, he's going to these states, he's going to town halls, diners, things of that nature, not just cherry picking media outlets to talk to. Vivek will talk to anybody. I mean, look what happened in time on CNN. I mean, the guy got fired for taking on Vivek. Go on MSNBC and NBC. He's not afraid of anybody. And I think that's what voters are seeing. And that's why he's surging to second place, now tied with Ron DeSantis, which blows my mind. Because
it's crazy.
It's beautiful. Yeah. We love to see it.
It's really mind-blowing,
You know, with all due respect to Vivek, Ron DeSantis has spent the last 2 years garnering incredible press all over the country for having this iron fist in Florida and keeping Florida free and where woke goes to die, and this entire narrative that we've seen built up over the last 2 years where, you know, everything was set for him to be the
prince of MAGA.
The natural person to go up against Donald Trump. And to see Vivek that didn't have this media hype of accomplishments, you know, like Ron DeSantis sneak up on him, I think says a lot to just how unlikable Ron DeSantis is.
I think also, you know, it goes to show that what I said on Twitter, number one, is that Trump supporters are not racist, and the majority of these people are not, because if they want a guy whose last name is Ramaswamy, right? Is that how you say it?
Yeah.
You don't have the racism that they claim that MAGA has. Think about that for one. And two, I think with the DeSantis campaign is that they insulated Ron DeSantis. It's like they call him the bubble boy because he was only allowed to speak to the Florida Standard and Florida Voice News. Now, all of a sudden, he's going to go on Megyn Kelly. She was begging him to go for months. He wouldn't go on. And he was allowed to go on Dave Rubin and Ben Shapiro. That's it.
He also just made a comment about Trump's indictment on, I want to say 2 nights ago. He finally mentioned Trump's name because we've been saying that he's like Voldemort to Ron DeSantis, where he spent quite some time without mentioning Trump's name.
Right.
So when the raid came up, he mentioned how the raid at Mar-a-Lago was unfair, but never once mentioned Trump's name. When the first indictment happened, didn't mention Trump's name. So we've seen him have this behavior, and actually 2 nights ago, and I think that it's very closely linked to what's happening in the polls with Vivek. He changed his strategy and he said that what was happening to Donald Trump was unfair and that the DOJ was being weaponized against him. And I think that that's very I've also noticed that a lot of the surrogates online seem to be matching up with that narrative. And I think that it is descriptive of what this article that Linda's referring to, which is that they are trying to change the strategy because they've realized that going head first into MAGA isn't going to be the way to attract the vote.
Let me ask you when we're about to be done with the segment, but what do you foresee? Because obviously Donald Trump is sitting in the polls. He's more than likely going to be the nominee. So what do we see in Vivek's future? Would he be open to a Trump Vivek ticket, maybe working in his administration? What do you foresee in the event that obviously he's not able to become president?
Yeah, every conversation I've ever had with Vivek Ramaswamy is he's running for president of the United States to become president and commander-in-chief in 2024. And again, he always says he's not running against Donald Trump. He's not running against anyone. He's running for the White House. And I think the reason why he's surging in the polls and now is cut up to Ron DeSantis is that Vivek Ramaswamy and Donald Trump are the only business owners and political outsiders in this race. That's it. And if you look at Vivek's agenda, way back in February, he talked about bombing cartels and using the military to secure the border. Back in February, he talked about shutting down the FBI, shutting down the Department of Education. And then in June, out of nowhere, Ron DeSantis says the same thing. And people aren't going to be fooled that he's basically taking Vivek's agenda, Donald Trump's agenda, and trying to take it as his own. So the debates are going to be huge for Vivek at the end of August in Milwaukee. And he plans on running for the president in 2024. And at the end of the day, let voters decide. But I think what's telling, and I'll close by saying this, you ladies mentioned, again, when the multiple indictments that came through with Donald Trump, the very first candidate to come out and say it's wrong, the Justice Department should not be weaponized to attack him. It's wrong to basically try and take him out using the FBI. One candidate did that, Vivek Ramaswamy, not Ron DeSantis.
Right. That's true. Thank you so much for coming by today. Hopefully sometime we'll be able to have Vivek on the show as well. So put in a good word for us. We really appreciate it. We're going to continue to closely watch his campaign and support in any way that we can. And you can always come on the show. So thanks